Let us begin with President Moon Jae-in's state visit to China. The top office confirmed he will not only travel to Beijing, he will cover some 2,000 kilometers from the Chinese capital to another very significant destination. Hwang Ho-jun zooms in on the itinerary of the Liberal leader's tour 4-day trip.
There's no doubt President Moon's state visit to China comes at a difficult time, says the Blue House, but it is a monumental and necessary undertaking to normalize relations between the two countries after a long diplomatic row over Seoul's deployment of the THAAD system and Beijing's retaliation against it. The two countries reached an agreement in late October to set aside their differences, and according to the deputy director of Seoul's National Security Office, the event will be a chance to focus on the future of Seoul and Beijing's relationship.
Presidents Moon and Xi will evaluate the past 25 years since Seoul and Beijing established diplomatic relations in 1992, but also discuss ways to cultivate a future-oriented strategic partnership while reinforcing exchanges and cooperation in various areas.
The day after President Moon arrives in China, an official welcoming ceremony will be held at the Great Hall of the People, which will be followed by an expanded summit and then a small-scale bilateral summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping. This will be the third summit meeting between the two heads of state since the South Korean leader took office in May. The first two were on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany, and then the APEC summit in Da Nang, Vietnam. The two leaders are expected to discuss ways to peacefully resolve the North Korea nuclear issue. Moon's trip to China comes 2 weeks after Pyongyang launched an apparent intercontinental ballistic missile on November 29th, resuming its missile provocations after a 75-day hiatus. They will also exchange thoughts on economic cooperation between the two countries, including ways to link Seoul's new northern and new southern policies to Beijing's One Belt, One Road initiative. And the Blue House said earlier that President Moon will stop by the city of Chongqing during his trip. It's a place that not only holds historical significance for Korea as a site of the nation's provisional government during the Japanese occupation, but also the linchpin of President Xi's policies focused on China's economic cooperation and development.
With South Korea and Japan as North Korea warns that war is on the way. Let's get right to Amy Kellogg, who is live for us in Milan with the very latest on that. Good morning, Amy.
Good morning, Heather. Well, this isn't the first time that North Korea has threatened this. And of course, when the idea of a possible naval blockade was floated to keep banned goods from reaching North Korea, Pyongyang said that would be, quote, yet another declaration of war. So this isn't new. And these were the drills that took place on the Korean Peninsula last week between the U.S. and South Korea. Now, this week, missile tracking exercises are taking place between Japan, South Korea, and the U.S. In response to last week's exercises, North Korea said this meant that, quote, the outbreak of war was an established fact. Here's the U.S. ambassador to the UN.
If North Korea attempts to threaten or do anything to destabilize us or our allies, we absolutely will utterly destroy them.
Of course, North Korea has been testing missiles with increasing intensity this year. Yesterday, 2 tectonic tremors were detected in North Korea, believed to be aftershocks from its declared H-bomb test in September. Yesterday, we got a glimpse of Kim Jong-un up on Mount Paektu, said to be a sacred place because it was the birthplace of the original North Korean dictator, Kim Il-sung, though in fact he was born in the Soviet Union. Now, finally, Heather, the anti-nuclear weapons group that won the Nobel Peace Prize this year and was given that prize yesterday had a very grim warning, saying the total destruction of humanity by nuclear weapons was just one impulsive tantrum away. Heather.
The Pentagon says the United States is, quote, well postured to deal with a possible SLBM launch by North Korea. Now, the remarks come amid reports that Pyongyang's submarine launched ballistic missiles where the SLBM program is advancing. A spokesperson for the Pentagon said that while he cannot comment on specific intelligence regarding North Korea, the U.S. is, quote, watching them closely. He added that Washington remains ready with South Korea and Japan to counter any threats from North Korea. And in regards to the ongoing trilateral missile tracking exercise between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo that went underway on Monday, the spokesman said it's intended to maintain readiness against North Korea while also making sure that the allies can communicate and employ the necessary capabilities to counter such threat.
Fox News foreign policy analyst Karen Skinner. She is the director of the Institute for Politics and Strategy at Carnegie Mellon University and Hoover Institution Research Fellow. Karen, good to see you on the program once again. Welcome back.
Thank you.
You just heard Lindsey Graham. Do you agree with that view on this?
Absolutely. Preemption is becoming something that we have to think about a lot more carefully and daily, but it's not where we want to be. But the fact of the matter is that the nuclear blackmail that the North Korean regime is trying to impose on the United States is something we cannot ignore. And that's why the recent air drills that are taking place by the United States and the government in Seoul are so important because they show the quality and the quantity of U.S. military prowess in the air. And, there's just been a quantitative and qualitative, difference in what we've been doing in these military drills in 2017 due to the provocations that the North Koreans continually have put forth through their various missile tests.
Now, to follow up, Karen, on Maria's point, you said you agree with what Senator Lindsey Graham had to say, and what he said is that we're getting close to a military conflict. So I guess my question would be is what triggers that conflict? Is there some sort of an event you can foresee that would be first shot fired in all this?
I think military planners are spending day and night on that very question, and I'm not sure that we know exactly when they will decide to kind of so-called pull the trigger and do something preemptively. But the military drills that we're undertaking, I do think, affect the calculus of the North Korean regime, and more importantly, perhaps, they are helping to make clear to the Chinese that this, menace of the North Korean regime is such a provocation for their own border. And I think that will begin to help really perhaps make the North Koreans at some point look at their options differently, because the Chinese now have to be working overtime, given what could possibly happen in, before year's end even.
Yep. Chiron, it's Dagan McDowell. What about additional pressure we can put on China and Russia in terms of sanctions? The sanctions out of the UN, we know that Singapore and Thailand have been very slow to enforce these sanctions. And with what came out of the United Nations, we merely capped oil imports or oil exports to North Korea and labor contracts. We did not cut off those cash lifelines to North Korea completely. What else can we do?
Sanctions have an uneven record in recent decades across the board in terms, and one of the reasons is that often, even when you get a UN Security Council resolution imposing sanctions, and we've had, some very powerful ones just this year, it's hard to get all parties to comply. And so I think it's important to kind of make sure that compliance happens insofar as we can do that. But really, the Chinese and the Russians have not taken leadership on this issue. And what's happening is that the United States is emerging in Northeast Asia as the, the great power that's the responsible actor, that's organizing interest, that's building, closer bilateral relations, U.S., South Korea, U.S., Japan. And we don't see that happening with the Russians and the Chinese. And I think that will begin to affect them as they, look like lesser actors in trying to bring peace and stability to the region. That's the United States right now.
Right.
Ms. Skinner, Israel has a missile defense system known as Iron Dome, which has proven very effective in the Middle East. Do the U.S., South Korea, and Japan have the kind of missile defense capabilities that could prevent an outright catastrophe and give our side a strategic advantage in this confrontation?
We do, and that's why, the North Koreans and the Chinese have been concerned about the THAAD system that the U.S. has been installing this year in South Korea, and have the Chinese wanted a slowdown on that commitment. There's been such advances in missile defense, both for South Korea and Japan in recent decades. And, that will play a role, but you have to have layered defense. It can't just be one missile defense system. You've got to have them for various phases, boost phase and other phases of a weapon that's been launched, and you've got to back that up with all other types of military power. We just don't want to have to get to that phase of U.S. North Korean relations, but we're getting there. But we're much more fortified than we've been in decades, not just in terms of military power, but also resolve.
Kyron, thanks so much for your insights this morning.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time very much. Kyron Skinner there.